You're right. There isn't a deep or genuine wellspring of support for this war, which was never really explained or sold to the public. It looks like, from the way the Kremlin and the Defense Ministry and other official bodies are carrying themselves, that they know this war is a difficult one to convince the Russian people of its merits, and so are trying to do it quickly, cheaply, without much attention. Of course, that's becoming more difficult as it goes on. I think that there was an estimation by the Kremlin that this operation, this invasion, could be over with much more quickly, and they could achieve their goals up into regime change in Kyiv faster. And as that's not happened, it's become more difficult, awkward, and potentially political untenable from the Kremlin to try and maintain this facade that there is no war and to not have the Russian people pay attention.
Now, also correct me if I'm wrong, but no casualty figures have been officially published by the Kremlin here. Are they still trying to lead the Russian public to believe that there hasn't been losses? Or, in other words, how controlled is the narrative there around this conflict?
The narrative is absolutely controlled to the point in which using the terms war, invasion, or other descriptions to accurately describe what is going on has in fact been rendered effectively illegal by Russia's communications watchdog. This is a limited or special military operation, quote unquote, according to the rhetoric of the Kremlin, and to refer to it as what it actually is, a war, an invasion of a neighboring country, is effectively banned, and there apparently now will be criminal consequences for media institutions that use or veer from the officially acceptable narrative. The way that state television talks about it is exactly the way that Putin himself and other Kremlin officials describe. This is a limited operation about helping the people of the Donbass. This was an unfortunate but required measure by Russia. So all of the usual official talking points are what you find on Russian state media, with no discussion, of course, not just of Russian military losses, which would be hard to explain or sell to the public, but also very little discussion, or really no discussion, of civilian damage, both in terms of infrastructure and lives lost among Ukrainians, because that would also, I think, be something the Kremlin knows would be very difficult to explain and sell to the Russian public.
Now, if some of the reports are true and indicate that Russian progress hasn't been what it is, if you can give your analysis on what could still be considered or framed as a victory for Vladimir Putin if, let's say, he fails at regime change in Kyiv.
Very difficult to imagine. The thing that's so bizarre and terrifying about this war from its outset is it was never really clear what a credible, realistic political outcome could be. All wars end with a political solution that comes after the military phase, and I'm not sure from the beginning we had a sense, or I had a sense, other analysts had a sense of what would actually be realistic for Russia to achieve in the long term, in that sense, in Ukraine, and with the fighting turning out to be much more difficult and not nearly as quick or easy for Russia as it imagined. I think that becomes only all the more true. It becomes all the more difficult to understand how does this end, both for Ukraine and for Russia.
Now, in a way, on the flip side of my first question for you here, we have at least seen reports that I believe some 3,000 people arrested in the streets of Moscow and perhaps other cities for protesting the war. Are those seem to be credible reports?
Absolutely. There are people in the streets of Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, other cities protesting the war. Of course, for the past year or so, the Russian authorities have been particularly and acutely ruthless and impatient in dealing with street protests. So those who come out are being arrested in great numbers. That's certainly the intimidation factor, I think, works. It's at play that Russian authorities have demonstrated they are not going to deal with protests lightly. But despite that, we are still seeing people continue to come out. And how long these protests continue to go on and in what numbers, I think, will play a role in determining what sort of domestic political breaks or limitations the Kremlin feels like it has on its own actions.
And now to put the focus a bit more on Kyiv, where you are in Ukraine now, is there a sense among the public there, if you can get a gauge on this, that with the fact that those victories, or at least assumed victories for the Russians, didn't come in the first few days now, is the tide turning a bit? Is there a sentiment, at least a motivation building among the Ukrainians that they might be able to repel the Russians?
As to the tide of the actual military phase of the war, I won't really comment on that. I'm no expert, and I think that even though the invasion force didn't proceed with the speed and decisiveness that Russia planned, Russia still has an incredibly fearsome military arsenal that it can throw at the problem. So if it chooses to escalate, it may indeed be able to capture Kyiv at a horrific price, but it does have that military potential. On the question of the mood in Kyiv, people are very scared, and understandably so, but people are also very motivated. And so you have a really determined local population. People who have left Kyiv, many have fled, but the people who are here are very intent on being here and on ensuring that Kyiv stays in Ukrainian hands. So I think if this does turn into a protracted phase of street fighting, that could be really horrific and really consequential for both Russia and
Joshua Yaffa, thanks for giving us the latest from Kyiv and in lockdown and curfew here. Stay safe yourself, and thanks for the updates.
Thank you.